NET. A NET is an on-the-air meeting of hams. Does NET stand for network? I don't know, but it might as well. It's a formal way for hams to all have a meeting on the radios. And we do this all the time. And there are different kinds of nets. There's lots of social nets where the point of the net is just to get together and chat and say how their day went. There are public safety-oriented nets where you might have a subject that you discuss, or it's a test of specific equipment, or there's a goal where you check in with emergency power or something just so you know that you have that capability. Or when there's a disaster, there might be a net to coordinate whatever the communications assistance is that we're providing to the served agency. So that the served agency might want damage reports from around the area. So we'll have a damage net. We'll set up a net control station and he'll just ask for damage reports from around the area. We do a lot with a program called Skywarn, which is part of the National Weather Service. Skywarn is a volunteer activity that the National Weather Service coordinates where average individuals, when there's bad weather, get together and report that bad weather to the National Weather Service. Well, here in ham radio, we have a back door, if you will, into the National Weather Service. So we can have a Skywarn net to collect those damage reports periodically, or those weather reports periodically, whether it be wind speed, rainfall, tornadoes, snowfall, etc., and feed that data into the National Weather Service.
So Nelson, I think it was exactly a year ago, the week before Christmas, we had all that snow that was, and I think you were on, I was on.
Yep.
For about 2 days. We at specified times, we give snowfall reports because we're all from all over northern Michigan, and they got fed directly to the National Weather Service in Gator. And I think it worked really well.
That worked very well. We were taking snowfall measurements, I think, every 6 hours, as well as wind speed measurements, and reporting those in through a net control station that sent that off to the Weather Service. And the Weather Service was pushing that information back out to the media in real time. I had the TV on behind me. I gave a report, and 10 minutes later on the news, they said, oh, East Jordan had 25 inches of snow. That was measured in my backyard. So a net is where, in fact, we're going to have one at 9 o'clock tonight. Do you have radios that can receive ham frequencies?
Yes, they are.
Okay. If you tune it to 145.19 FM. Yep, 19.
So is it a dongle or SDR, or what's the ratio of those?
It's a USB attachment.
Okay, sure.
Mhm.
The reason I mentioned it is our SDR website you can go to, and it's just like a radio face. You can dial in and listen to ham frequencies. It's a lot of fun. It's a kind of a good way once you get on the air to see how far you're reaching, because you can record using your web browser from that, and you can pick your locations all around the world with SDR stations. So just search for SDR radio on Google. You'll find some previews.
I think that's how the guys figured out about the Ukraine thing, is they were using a SDR that was located, I think it's like 100 over from Ukraine.
Yeah.
Just listening to the frequencies there.
That's neat.
Yeah, Polar, so
Yep. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that example up. That is a fantastic example of using an SDR. I did that when I put up a new dipole antenna in my yard.
Okay.
I actually tried checking into a net, and I couldn't get in. It measured all right. It tuned up all right. I thought I did a pretty good job making it. Just couldn't get into the net. So I found some SDR stations around the Great Lakes area, and I just transmitted and listened for my own frequency, just to see if I was even getting out. Made some tweaks, got it to work, long story short. So if you listen in at 9 o'clock tonight, you'll hear a net, and listening to a net is really the best way to understand how it works. But a net is a way to reduce interference, simply put. Because if everyone's trying to talk to each other at the same time, well, that's QRM, it doesn't work. Because with very, very rare exceptions, you're talking or listening, not both, not at the same time. It's not like using a telephone where you can talk and listen at the same time. While that technically is possible, really no one ever does it in ham radio.
It kind of reminds me of when we were in the military, you'd receive a report from each squad leader.
Okay,
This group.
there you go. That's what we do. That's all it is. So net control says who can speak at what time. So they will go in order of who checks in. Okay, W8NWO, go ahead with your transmission, and stand by WN8Q. Then I get done, I say, WN8Q, go ahead, stand by N8MJL. It just keeps order to everything. Especially on HF or simplex, where not all stations can hear the other station, because then you really have potential for interference. If you have two stations transmitting at the same time because they can't hear each other, but net control can hear them both, that's not effective communication. Traffic is the information that you pass on the net. Traffic can be formal or informal. If I just check in and say, yeah, I had a pretty good day, we had 2 students in our ham radio class, well, that's informal. Or I could literally write out a radiogram. I don't know if that's in the slides here or not. I know it's in the book. There's a picture of what a radiogram looks like. There it is. And there's also some forms we use in public safety that are very similar. So a radiogram is a very formal way. These lines are for the message. So if I went to let's say I'm a non-ham, and I say, Will, I need you to get a message back to my wife because she doesn't know where I am and the phones are all down. So I would write out exactly what I want you to say, and you get on the air and you would pass that traffic. It's very formal. You get every single word right, every spelling correct, and you pass that message on. So different types of traffic. In public safety, and I don't think this is on the test, but in public safety, there's what's called the incident command system, and ICS has forms galore. They have a form called an ICS 213. It serves the same purpose as the radiogram that it just showed you, and we send 213s all the time. That's traffic.
We have something like that at work for, we practice for like emergencies, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And so it basically directs your communications to the SRC to make sure you're saying exactly the information you need in the order, you go through, fill it out, and then read it.
Do you have an HF station there too? Or anything called shares?
I don't think so.
Okay. Shares is an acronym of the U.S. government, and that is an HF, shortwave radio service, that's used a lot by bigger government agencies and big utility companies, big telecommunications companies, and critical resources.
Okay.
Like, I bet any live nuke plant got a share station.
Most likely. As a, it's just a, they don't have one complexity of a couple out of one.
Mm-hmm.
So.
We talked about this a little bit. You'll have part of a message, whether it's a radiogram or a 213, called a preamble, and that's all the administrative stuff that you need to keep track of the message and to know who to send it to. The message itself is called the body, and specific to a radiogram, they have what's called a check, which is just a count of how many words are in the message. So if I pass the message on to Larry and I say the check is 14, but he only has 13 words, he knows he missed one.
Right. That makes sense.
And those are on the test. Are you into contesting at all, Larry? I am not.
I do POTA, Parks on the Air,
Okay.
which is not exactly contesting, but he doing summits on the air. I'll do special events like W1AW, the ARRL station. Nelson mentioned that. They were having last year a volunteer year, and you could operate using their call letters in your state. So WN8Q is my normal call sign that I use, W1AW/8, to identify that I was not in Newington, Connecticut, but in Michigan, and just called CQ to see how many people I could get. And then they got points for having contacted W1AW. Again, as you get ham, you'll find that's kind of a famous call sign, kind of a famous radio station. I thought, oh, it'd be fun to operate as W1AW. I think we've all done WAGB, which is the icebreaker frequency, but we do it on the ship. Anyway, just real quick, Parks on the Air, you should just go to either a state or government, U.S. government park, portable equipment, and There's an organization called POTA, Parks on the Air, just to encourage you to get outside. They all have park numbers, and you get credit for having contacted so many parks.
Okay.
There's activators. It's a little more complicated. I don't want to take too much time up on that. But it's just one of the many things you can do that I think is just a hoot. I've done parks in Florida and in Indiana, and I've done some up here in Michigan. And it's just so much fun.
And there are contests where, with both contests, the goal is to make as many contacts as possible. And there's contests for all sorts of things. Parks on the Air, Summits on the Air. There's the annual sweepstakes. There is, what's the state-by-state one? Yeah, the Michigan QSO Party. Thank you. The goal of all of them is just to make as many contacts as possible. But different contests will have different bends, if you will. Parks on the Air is to activate parks. National parks, state parks.
And that's all. You have to look on the website. It's only state and U.S. government.
Right. Not your little township park, et cetera.
Not county parks. There's some really nice parks that aren't
Yep.
fully authorized for
Some contests are only on certain frequencies. Some are only on certain modes. Some are for people that want to run what we call boat anchor radios. Like I was saying before, you got the big heavy transmitter and receiver. You're running vacuum tubes and full AM modulation. There's contests for that.
It's basically like a challenge that you can take on.
Yeah. And in those contests, you just exchange basic information, just enough to get the other person's, usually it's call sign and grid location, grid square, which we'll talk about grid squares a little bit at some point, I'm sure. But usually it's just the very basics. You don't usually say, oh, how's the weather over there where you are? Because five other stations. Yeah, right. Yep. What do you get with all that? Bragging rights. Sometimes a certificate. Contests, I don't want to sound negative about contests. It's not my thing, but it is a really good way to build on-the-air operating skills. And it's a good way to see where your signal can reach at a certain time of day and a certain frequency. It's a good way to prove your equipment. If you're transmitting, can your equipment hold up to the strain? So, contests have their value. I'm going to go off topic a little bit and say there are so many things you can do in amateur radio. Digital, analog, shortwave, VHF, UHF, computer to computer, device to device, mesh, Wi-Fi, contesting, meteor scatter, satellite communication, or you just want to talk long distances, or you just want to talk to your neighbors, or you just want to prepare for disasters and power outages. There's so many things you can do in ham radio. You can't do them all. There's certain things I enjoy, there's other things I just don't have time for. Nothing wrong with that. There's hams I have never talked to on the radio because that's not their thing. They don't want to just get on the air and be social. They want to do meteor scatter or whatever. And that's cool. Here's grid squares. Back on topic. So you're familiar with GPS coordinates where you got latitude and longitude? Ham radio uses something called the Maidenhead locator system, or grid squares, grid locators, where it's not exactly a latitude and longitude number, whereas well, you can see on the map here, the whole country is broken up into this grid of letter and number designations. So if you want to, let's say that you're in a contest and someone says, oh yeah, my grid square is GH75. You look at the map and say GH, oh wow, they're in South Africa or South America. And this can be broken down and broken down and broken down. Let me see how far this goes.
Yeah, the military uses grid squares kind of like this.
Okay, cool.
They're a little different, but it's, subdivisions of subdivisions of subdivisions. I think it will be the some shit like you. I call it wellhead locations.
Okay. There's also something called what three words. Have you ever heard of what three words?
Yes.
That's similar in the sense that there's three common English words that will narrow your location down to a pretty small square. It's gaining some traction. The idea is, let's say you're in a remote park and you have an emergency, you call 911. You don't have an address. you don't have a GPS, so you don't know your coordinates, but there's a sign that says your what 3 words are alpha popcorn grass or whatever. You can call 911 and say, yeah, I'm at alpha popcorn grass, and they know what that means. I'm curious to see if that takes off or not. It's been around a long time, and it doesn't really seem like it's real well known yet, so I've got the idea it's not taken off.
Yeah.
But within each square, you have 2 letters, then you have 2 numbers. So Michigan is right here under the EN. But if you break Michigan down even further, you'll have 2 numbers, and we are actually EN75, I believe. I know my station is EN75.
And you can actually get 2 more letters.
Yep.
To have, which is similar to the My 3 Words.
Mm-hmm.
You've got 3 groups of 2 letters or numbers, and mine's EN75 and ML are my last 2 letters, and it's a pretty small piece of geography.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mine's EN75KE. The first 2 letters are always capitalized, then you have the 2 numbers, and then the last 2 letters are always lowercase. That's probably not on the test, but that is important to know, because we really do use grid squares a lot. Usually just the letters and numbers. You don't, usually like if you're in a contest or something, they don't ask you for the last 2 letters, but it really is important to know. A fox hunt is where someone hides a transmitter someplace and they tell you to go find it. I've never done a fox hunt, and I've always wanted to. There are groups around that do them once in a while, but you use a directional antenna and point your antenna. Oh, okay, so it signals strongest that way. Or you do it the opposite way. You move your antenna around until you get a null, and you know the direction is right behind you. Sometimes a null is actually more precise than getting the strongest signal. One thing I have to do where I work is I have to locate our buried cables. And I've got a tool that puts a tone, I'm really off topic again, but I've got a tool that puts a tone on the buried cable, and I've got a receiver with like a mouse on the end. And I whip that receiver back and forth across the ground until I get a tone. So I get a tone, I get a tone, I get a tone, and then when I'm right on top of the cable, I get a null, and it drops out. Because that's actually more precise than just trying to listen for the loudest tone. I'll get a louder tone, louder tone, louder tone, and then when I get that null, I know I am right on top of that cable. That's what I would say about fox hunting. It sounds like a lot of fun. And it's a good thing to do because it helps you. You can roll a lot of things into it. You can roll. What is it when you're walking through the woods with a compass trying to find a certain spot? Orienteering. You can roll orienteering into it. Geocaching. It's also really helpful for search and rescue. It helps build those search and rescue skills. The other thing it's really good for is, as like Michael was saying, they had someone making illegal transmissions, and they had to find him.
Yeah, I've heard if you hear through the Hamilton area, they will find you.
Yep. Fox hunting is a good way to practice those skills.
The other thing it's useful for is, especially on HF, you'll have noise, and it's coming from some valves or transformer, power line.
You find that?
In my house, I had, I'll make this for sure, I had a buzz on one of the radio bands. I could not figure out where that buzz was coming from. And it would come and go a little bit. So I got my my satellite antenna, which is directional, and I put it on my handout. So it was VHF when I was doing HF frequency, so it was way off frequency, but the buzz was still coming through. When I walked outside, the buzz went away. So I knew it was inside. Long story short, I kept walking around the house. It was a refrigerator making the noise, causing RF, radio frequency noise. And I bought a choke, just a sort of a big magnet, not exactly, but kind of, and wrapped a power cord around it. And that choked off the radio wave, which was emitting from the refrigerator, causing problems. And
Nice.
I did it with a Fox light.
Yeah. Good example.
I was reading a story online about, I think it was a power company. They were losing voltage in an area. And so they talked to one of the amps in there. If you point right here, that's where it's at.
Nice.
You're on the radio.
Yeah. I talked about how our group provides public service and disaster communications. The last night of this class, I'm going to have our president come in and give a little speech more about what we do. I'm also going to have the Emmett County Emergency Management Director come in and give a presentation as well. Actually, he offered, I'm not having him come in. He's actually a ham too. He's a fantastic fellow, fantastic guy. And we're going to talk more about this. But for the test, you need to know that Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service allows amateur radio operators to provide disaster communications. RACES is a federal program administered at the county level. Your county emergency management director, which is like the person that coordinates emergency response within your county, by law, it's the chairman of the county board, but in practice, they designate that authority to a hired person. Every county I know of hires an emergency management director. Emergency manager, emergency management director, EM, those are all synonymous terms. That person works with the hams in the area, or we like them to, work with hams in the area, and they officially bless certain people to provide disaster communications in their county. RACES is the program that they use to do that with, administered at the county level. On the other side, you have ARES, Amateur Radio Emergency Service. That is a program ran by the American Radio Relay League, ARRL. We're going to talk about them more because they're the big agency, they're the big nonprofit organization that advocates for amateur radio on a national level. We're all ARRL members, and I'm not saying that they are the be-all, end-all, and I'm not saying you got to join them. By no means, but they do a lot of good for ham radio. They have their own program called ARES. In practice, most hams are RACES and ARES members both. There isn't really a form to sign up for RACES or ARES. You sign up with your whatever emergency communications program is operating in your county. For us, for Charlevoix, Sheboygan, and Emmett counties, the three counties work together, and the organization that we belong to is that organization. So we have a membership form. When you fill out that membership form and become a member of our organization, your ARES, your RACES. Now I'm going to expand a little further. This is not in the book, not on the test, but there is a new umbrella term called AUXCOM, Auxiliary Communications. Because we had RACES, because we had ARES, there's also Saturn, the Salvation Army Team Emergency Radio Network. The Red Cross has hams that do emergency communications. Civil Air Patrol has hams that do emergency communications. All these organizations have these volunteer communications people. And so we have an umbrella term called AUXCOM that refers to all these auxiliary communications volunteer organizations that use ham radio. And it brings them under one umbrella so that when local governments and agencies need help, they put into their plans AUXCOM. And then whatever specific organizations are able to meet that need come under that AUXCOM umbrella.
Yes, and I would just add one thing to that, and that is the AUXCOM term is recognized by the state of Michigan government. So if you go, look at the state of Michigan government, it'll recognize AUXCOM. There's a whole page that explains what that is, and provide identification cards to people like Nelson and I to allow that, theoretically allow us into emergency areas, tornado areas, and that sort of thing. But it's more than just a colloquial term that we call ourselves. It's
I'm glad you mentioned
a
that.
descriptive term for the state of Michigan, at least, is mentioned in there. I'm not sure what the document is, but I've seen it online.
In fact, I've got my AUXCOM card. There's my ARES card. And in here, I probably have a RACES card. Oh, no. That card is actually issued by our local emergency management office, or back when we had a Tri-County OEM. But now AUXCOM really replaces both of these. AUXCOM, to add to what Larry said, is an official program like RACES, and if I remember correctly, it is administered by Department of Homeland Security's CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, I believe.
I think you're correct.
So,
State has a division of that, so it'll be operated by the state of Michigan's office
mhm.
for Homeland Security.
Michigan State Police Office of Homeland Security. Yep, I believe you're right. There's lots of three-letter acronyms in government. You got TLAs and you got extended three-letter acronyms, which are more than 3 letters. And the thing about Auxcom, though, is it is a more formalized program where you can get different levels of certification within Auxcom. It's such a new program that honestly, I don't know that anyone in our group has any official Auxcom certifications. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But you'll hear ComT, ComL. ComT is Communications Technician, ComL is Communications Unit Leader. And there are what are called position task books to get those certifications. So there's a standardized book that everyone in the country can get that tells what tasks you have to complete to get that certification. So you might have to actually work a certain number of disasters, you have to know the incident command system, you have to be officially blessed by your county emergency management director. You complete these tasks, you go through a training course, and boom, you're certified. So that's kind of cool. It's nice that they're adding some uniformity to what we've been doing for years, especially because, like up here, there are 4 hams in our group in Charlevoix County. There are 4 hams in our group in Emmett County, Sheboygan County. There are 8 hams in our group in Emmett County. If something's going down in Charlevoix County, I need help. And Charlevoix County needs to know that when they pull in Auxcom volunteers from surrounding areas, that they have a certain level of understanding and capability. We talked about Summits on the Air, Parks on the Air. That's all right. I forgot it was on there too. So this chapter is called Things to Do. So getting back to that topic of what you can do with ham radio, like I mentioned, the sky's the limit. Other thing we're doing a lot more lately is building APRS trackers. APRS is the Automatic Packet Reporting System. It used to be Automatic Position Reporting System. You have a GPS hooked to your radio and it sends out a signal that contains your GPS information. Some radios have it built in, or you can build trackers. We've got a guy in the group that all he does is build these APRS trackers. That's ham radio. So then when we're doing search and rescue, each search team can just have an APRS tracker. You look on a map, you can see where all the search parties have gone. The map shows what areas have been searched. Then day 2 of the search, you know where to send the next teams. It's just fantastic. Join a ham radio club. Find other hams in the area. Find an Elmer. I don't know if Elmer is anywhere in the test, but an Elmer is a person that helps you get started and mentors you in ham radio. I personally didn't have a single Elmer, but I had a number of them in different organizations that I've been a part of. And it's really good to connect with people in your area. And ham radio, as one of the slides said earlier, is the original social network. So be social and join a club or find other hams. Go to ham radio events, let kids operate, build an antenna. This was a club project years ago. I mentioned that if you need a better signal, you can put up a better antenna. So that might mean one of these, or it might mean something like this. This is called window line. This is actually transmission line. This stuff is supposed to be used between your radio and an antenna, especially at HF frequencies. But here, one of the guys in our club showed us how to build these where this is the antenna. There's some special little tricks. It's soldered at the top. There's a cut right here at a certain spot. The feed line, which is what this is called, is hooked on at a very specific spot. And the math and the physics all work out to make this a dual band 2-meter, 70-centimeter antenna. Let's say that I was asked to help out providing communications in this room. This room, if you didn't realize, is the Emergency Operations Center. So when there's a disaster, all the head honchos from the county all convene in this room and make a plan on how to operate, how to solve the crisis. Maybe I'm asked to come here to provide communications between this EOC and a shelter 10 miles away. Well, that shelter 10 miles away is a little bit too far for direct communication from a handheld. Even if there was a repeater, let's say I'm just outside of the range of the repeater. So let's say I bring in a mobile radio. This is say a 25-watt radio versus a 5-watt handheld. And instead of using a rubber duck antenna, I hang this thing up on the wall someplace, hook it up to my mobile rig. Now I can contact that shelter 10 miles away.
Yeah, I've seen, was it, at the camp we were at, there was a big old antenna that they had hoisted up into the trees, like a pulley system, and I can't imagine how probably very good with it, but I've heard that makes it pretty long communications.
A fun club project is to make a potato gun for launching antennas into trees with. We did that one time. There's a little hands-on science museum thing called Raven Hill, not far from where I live. They've got a ham station there. And as a project one year at that ham station, we built potato guns so that we could launch wire antennas up into the trees. A lot of fun.
Make slingshots to get antennas in trees. They make fishing rods where the line spins off with a weight on the end to get it over the tree and then pull it down and tie it on an antenna. So it's a lot of fun, doing that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Connect your computer to your radio. Let's say I'm going to keep using public safety oriented examples just because that's what I do on ham radio. But let's say that we're talking between this EOC and that shelter, and we need a list of everyone who's at that shelter so that we know where they are. So they can type up a ICS 213, type it on the computer, so you get all the names, spellings correct, and so forth. Connect their computer to their radio. I connect my computer to my radio and transmit that text over radio. And then on this end, I print it out, hand it to my EM. In that example, that would transmit in probably about 2 minutes. The better your signal is, the faster you can run it. Yes. If I'm transmitting that list between here and the state EOC in Lansing over HF, I probably got to run it pretty slow because that communications path is just not as robust. If I'm sending it between here and a shelter 2 miles away, I'll run MT1000 to KL and it goes in 30, 45 seconds. Digital is a whole different world, and we're going to cover that in a future chapter. There's a guy in our group that just bleeds digital, and he's going to tell you everything digital. Even though I'm a young guy and a computer geek, I'm like, digital what? I'm a little slow at picking it up. That's all we got in the slides. Oh, there we go. Learn how to solder. This isn't in this class, but if you guys want to learn how to solder, I love teaching soldering. It's a whole lot of fun, and it's a fantastic skill to learn.
I need to learn when I get it because
All right.
I used to have to like our tech guy do it for me. I'm like, this is something I could really learn how to do. No, it's not there anymore. My Alex can solder too, but that's not.
Once you learn a few basic principles with soldering, you can run with it. It's easy.
Yeah, and the blade was a high-low feather that I wanted to be able to put into a breadboard and I played around with that. It's a little microcontroller, right? But yeah, when it came to that, it didn't come soldered on. So.
Just saying, Larry, I want to do a soldering demo one of these nights.
Oh, sure, I can bring solder here some night too.
All right, cool.
I think I've got some scrap PC boards too, you can solder, so there's just.
Good.
We're going to study parts on one of the nights, and
Yes.
great, we can do that.
That's a good idea.
We can bring an old meter and.
Good times.
Yeah. I'm teaching the night where we're talking about components, so that's a good idea. I'll bring a soldering iron. I'll bring some scrap board if you want to too. That'd be great.
I don't know if I'm assigned that night or not, but yeah, I can probably make it, so.
And then start to learn into circuitry and stuff like that, because I want to go back, I want to go to college and try to get like a computer science associates or something like that.
Oh,
Cool.
sure.
Because it would be very handy to have.
Yeah. I do have you on the schedule for that night, Larry.
Oh, awesome, yeah, we'll get together and
Yeah,
maybe we can build a blinking LED or some little symbol
Yep.
for a project.